Montana Territory, 1867. A vast wilderness where towering pines whispered secrets to jagged mountain peaks, where rivers carved ancient pathways through valleys that had witnessed countless seasons of birth and death. This untamed expanse, beautiful and merciless, drew brave souls westward with promises of gold, land, and new beginnings, promises that sometimes ended in tragedy beneath its indifferent skies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When the Anderson family's wagon disappeared somewhere between Fort Benton and the newly established mining settlement of Blackwater Creek, most assumed it was just another casualty of the perilous frontier. Attacks on settlers weren't uncommon, whether from desperate outlaws, territorial conflicts, or the harsh elements themselves. The wilderness had countless ways to swallow travelers without leaving evidence of their fate. What no one could have imagined was that 5-year-old Lily Anderson survived the brutal attack that claimed her family. And what remained beyond comprehension was how she endured what followed, years living among a pack of timber wolves that adopted her as one of their own, transforming a frightened human child into something both more and less than human. This is the story of a girl who learned to run with wolves, to speak their silent language, to survive in a world without human touch or voice. And it is the story of James Miller, a solitary hunter and trapper whose chance encounter with a wild-eyed young woman upended everything he believed about civilization and savagery, about what can be lost and what, against all odds, might be found again. The Anderson family had set out from St. Louis in early spring of 1867, joining a wagon train headed west toward the Montana goldfields. Thomas Anderson, a former schoolteacher with perpetually ink-stained fingers, had inherited a modest sum from his late father, enough to purchase supplies and stake a claim in territory rumored to be rich with opportunity. His wife Sarah, 8 months pregnant when they departed, dreamed of establishing a proper home where their growing family could put down roots. Their daughter Lily spent most of the journey perched atop supply crates, her copper hair in perpetual tangles despite her mother's daily brushing, her freckled face turned toward the ever-changing landscape with insatiable curiosity. Family legend held that Lily spoke in full sentences before her second birthday, peppering her parents with questions about everything from buffalo migrations to star patterns. That child's mind works faster than a spinning wheel, the wagon master remarked after Lily interrogated him about river currents one evening around the campfire. Her parents exchanged proud glances, Thomas already envisioning the school he would eventually establish with Lily as its first student. The journey progressed without unusual incident until the wagon train reached Fort Benton in late summer. There, faced with Sarah's advancing pregnancy and the approaching autumn weather, the Andersons made a fateful decision. Rather than winter at the fort as advised, they joined 2 other families planning to push forward to Blackwater Creek, where cabins might be secured before the first snow. "We'll be fine," Thomas assured Sarah as he helped her into their wagon for the final leg of their journey. "Just 3 more weeks of travel, and we'll be settled before the baby arrives." The small convoy of 3 wagons departed Fort Benton on September 12, 1867, following crude maps and directions provided by previous travelers. When they failed to arrive at Blackwater Creek by mid-October, a search party was organized, but early snowfall covered any tracks that might have led to their location. The following spring, fragments of wagon wheels and scattered personal belongings were discovered near Griffin's Gorge, suggesting an ambush or accident. With no bodies recovered and no witnesses to the apparent tragedy, the Anderson family and their traveling companions were commemorated with empty graves in the Blackwater Creek Cemetery. The official record ended there, a tidy conclusion to one more frontier tragedy, soon overshadowed by others. But official records rarely capture the extraordinary circumstances that occasionally defy all probability. For Lily Anderson did not die that autumn day in Griffin's Gorge, as arrows and bullets tore through canvas and flesh as her father fell. Defending her mother as her pregnant mother pushed her toward the undergrowth with a final, desperate command to run, Lily obeyed. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled until darkness fell and terror overwhelmed conscious thought. She ran until exhaustion claimed her, collapsing beneath a rocky outcropping as shock finally delivered merciful unconsciousness. The first snow of the season fell that night, covering the sleeping child in a thin white blanket. By morning, her body temperature had dropped dangerously, her breathing shallow, her small form nearly invisible against the landscape. Had circumstances been only slightly different, Lily Anderson's story would have ended there, another victim of the merciless wilderness. Instead, curious noses investigated the strange scent, neither prey nor predator, emanating from beneath the rocky shelf. The wolf pack had denned nearby for several seasons, the territory offering good hunting and adequate shelter. Led by a large grey female with a distinctive white blaze on her chest, the wolves approached the unconscious child with cautious interest. In another time, or with another pack, the outcome might have been swift and savage. But nature occasionally creates anomalies that defy explanation. The alpha female, who had lost her most recent litter to disease, approached closest, sniffing the child's face, neck, and hands. Whatever she detected, perhaps the lingering scent of Lily's mother, perhaps some atavistic recognition of shared vulnerability, prompted her to make an extraordinary decision. Rather than retreat or attack, the wolf began to lick snow from the child's face and hair, the rough tongue stimulating circulation in nearly frozen skin. When Lily stirred with a faint whimper, the wolf responded with a soft whine, positioning her body alongside the child to share vital warmth. By the time Lily regained full consciousness, she was surrounded by the wolf pack, their bodies creating a protective barrier against the deepening cold. Instinctive terror warred with desperate need for warmth and comfort. Too young to fully comprehend her parents' fate, yet old enough to recognize her absolute solitude, Lily made a choice driven by the most fundamental survival instinct. She burrowed closer to the warmth offered by the large female wolf, her small hands clutching coarse fur as sobs racked her body. The wolves tolerated this strange behavior from the human pup, the alpha female repeatedly licking tears from the child's face with surprising gentleness. When the pack eventually rose to move toward their established den, the female lingered, watching Lily with intent yellow eyes. When the child attempted to follow on unsteady legs, falling repeatedly in the deepening snow, the wolf returned to walk beside her, offering support and guidance. Thus began Lily Anderson's extraordinary transformation from human child to wolf child, a metamorphosis driven by the most primal forces of survival and belonging. The wolf den, a spacious cavity beneath massive fallen trees, reinforced by generations of pack excavation, became her new home. The pack, particularly the alpha female that humans would have called White Blaze, became her new family. The first weeks were the most perilous. Without the wolves' acceptance and protection, Lily would have perished quickly. Her human clothing, inadequate for Montana winter, deteriorated rapidly. Her human digestive system, accustomed to cooked food, rebelled against raw meat regurgitated by White Blaze. Her human vocal cords strained with increasingly desperate calls for parents who never answered. Yet children, particularly young children, possess remarkable adaptability. Lily's body gradually adjusted to her new diet, extracting essential nutrition from the wolves' offerings. Her skin toughened against cold and physical contact with rough terrain. Most significantly, her developing mind began to interpret and adopt the complex social dynamics of the wolf pack. She learned when to approach White Blaze for food and comfort, when to maintain submissive postures toward the alpha male, when to participate in communal activities, and when to withdraw. She absorbed the nuanced vocalizations that constituted wolf communication. Different types of howls signaling location or warnings, growls establishing boundaries, whines expressing submission or distress. As her human language faded from disuse, these wolf communications became her primary mode of expression. Similarly, as her human socialization receded, wolf social structures shaped her understanding of relationship and hierarchy. The remarkable neuroplasticity of her developing brain allowed Lily to adapt to her extraordinary circumstances with increasing success. By the first spring after her adoption, the child who had once been Lily Anderson moved on all fours more often than upright, communicated primarily through canine vocalizations, and participated in the pack's hunting activities as an observer, learning wolf strategies through constant attention. Her copper hair grew long and matted, forming a natural protection against weather. Her clothing had long since disintegrated, replaced by accumulated dirt and occasional mud that paradoxically protected her skin from insect bites and sunburn. The wolves accepted her not as human, but as an unusual pack member with distinctive limitations and occasional advantages. Her capable hands could remove painful thorns or burrs from their fur. Her upright posture sometimes allowed her to spot distant prey before others detected it. Her different scent occasionally confused potential threats, creating strategic advantages. During territorial confrontations with other predators, as seasons passed, memories of human existence faded into fragments. Occasional dreams of faces without names, phantom sensations of being held in arms rather than lying against fur, distant echoes of words that no longer carried meaning. By the time 3 winters had passed, the child retained almost nothing of Lily Anderson beyond unusual eye color, a vivid green that reflected her genetic heritage but no longer connected to conscious human identity. Her world consisted entirely of wolf priorities, territory, hunting, hierarchy, and survival. Beyond occasional encounters with other wildlife or distant sightings of human hunters, quickly avoided by the pack, she existed entirely within canine society, her development shaped by their norms rather than human expectations. This extraordinary adaptation might have continued indefinitely had the wolfpack's territory remained undisturbed. The Montana wilderness, however, was undergoing rapid transformation as mining operations expanded. Timber companies harvested ancient forests, and settlements pushed ever deeper into previously isolated regions. By 1873, the area surrounding Griffin's Gorge had changed significantly. The initial gold strikes had proven less plentiful than hoped, but secondary industries flourished. Blackwater Creek grew from mining camp to established settlement. Logging operations scarred mountainsides once thick with pine and fir. Game animals retreated from increased human activity, forcing predators like the wolf pack to adjust their hunting territories and patterns. This changing landscape brought James Miller deeper into the wilderness than his usual routes. At 34, Miller had already lived several lifetimes by frontier standards. Orphaned young in Pennsylvania, he'd worked Eastern factory jobs before the Civil War called him to service with the Union Army. The brutality he witnessed during 3 years of combat left him with a profound aversion to human company and an occasional haunted expression that discouraged casual conversation. After the war, Miller had drifted westward, working briefly as a steamboat crewman, railroad laborer, and cattle driver before finding his vocation as a hunter and trapper in the Montana Territory. He established a reputation for reliability, delivering prime pelts and meat to settlements on schedule without the drunken carousing or exaggerated tales common among others in his profession. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Miller, keeps to himself mostly, was the typical assessment from Blackwater Creek residents. Man could live 10 years in the woods without speaking to another soul, far as I can tell. But his pelts are prime, and his words good as gold. What most didn't recognize was that Miller's solitary nature concealed an unusual sensitivity. He observed animal behavior with extraordinary patience and insight, tracking not just physical signs, but patterns of activity that revealed deeper understanding of wildlife consciousness. This approach made him an exceptional hunter, but it also fostered respect for the creatures he pursued, a complexity that might have surprised those who considered him simply taciturn or antisocial. In early autumn of 1873, Miller ventured into previously unexplored terrain beyond Griffin's Gorge, seeking new beaver colonies after finding his usual trapping areas depleted by commercial operations. The season had been unusually dry, forcing him to follow a nameless creek farther into the high country than he'd previously traveled. He established a temporary camp near a promising valley, constructing a simple lean-to shelter against a rock face that offered protection from prevailing winds. Years of experience had taught him to build minimal fires, enough for cooking and essential warmth, but small enough to minimize visible smoke that might alert potential threats, whether human or animal. His second morning in the new territory, Miller woke before dawn with the distinct sensation of being watched. His hand moved silently to the rifle kept within arm's reach, his breathing controlled as he scanned the perimeter beyond his shelter. The feeling persisted through breakfast, a simple affair of coffee and journey bread, and followed him as he set the first beaver traps along the creek. "Getting jumpy in your old age," he muttered to himself, the sound of his own voice unfamiliar after weeks without speech. Yet the prickling awareness continued, accompanied by subtle signs his experienced eye couldn't ignore. Birds falling silent seconds before they would naturally react to his presence. Small game fleeing in patterns that suggested secondary disturbance. Something or someone was shadowing his movements with skill sufficient to remain undetected, despite his considerable woodcraft. Not indigenous hunters. Their approach would differ. Not typical predators. A mountain lion would behave otherwise. Miller continued his work while methodically eliminating possibilities, his outward calm belying heightened alertness. On the third day, he glimpsed his shadow, a flash of movement between distant trees, too deliberate for deer, too low for bear. That evening, he laid false trails, doubled back unexpectedly, and employed other techniques to potentially reveal his tracker. His efforts yielded nothing except confirmation that he was indeed being observed by something unusually cautious and intelligent. Before dawn on the fourth day, Miller implemented a different strategy. Rather than emerging from his shelter as previously established, he positioned himself in dense foliage 30 yards away, commanding a clear view of his campsite while remaining concealed. His patience, legendary among those few who had hunted with him, allowed him to remain motionless for hours as morning light gradually illuminated the clearing. The first sign came as subtle movement downwind of his former position. Branches, shifting slightly against the prevailing breeze. Miller's grip tightened imperceptibly on his rifle, his breathing controlled to prevent visible vapor in the cool morning air. When his observer finally emerged partially from cover, Miller found himself completely unprepared for the sight. The figure hesitated at the forest edge, unmistakably human in basic form, yet moving with animal wariness. Matted hair that might once have been reddish hung past thin shoulders. Dirt-covered skin revealed no clothing, Most startling were the posture and movement, sometimes low on all fours, occasionally rising to a half-crouched bipedal stance, every motion reflecting animal caution rather than human deliberation. Miller's first incoherent thought was of indigenous spirits described in whispered tales around frontier campfires, forest beings neither fully human nor animal. His second, more rational assessment suggested a feral child, though the possibility seemed beyond belief in this remote wilderness. For nearly 20 minutes, the wild figure conducted careful reconnaissance of the deserted campsite, displaying predator-like attention to potential threats. Eventually, confidence apparently established, the intruder moved fully into the clearing to investigate Miller's abandoned coffee pot, still hanging above cold ashes. From his concealed position, Miller could now confirm his visitor was female, probably in early adolescence based on size and proportion. Her movements alternated between quadrupedal and bipedal with equal comfort, a physical adaptation he'd never witnessed in humans. Most remarkable was her evident comfort with her surroundings, despite the autumn chill that required his heavy buckskin jacket for reasonable comfort. As she investigated his campsite with animal curiosity, Miller remained paralyzed by indecision. His instinct for self-preservation warranted maintaining his hidden position until the strange visitor departed. His hunter's curiosity demanded understanding this unprecedented encounter. Most troubling was an unexpected sense of responsibility. If this was indeed a human child, however transformed by extraordinary circumstances, could he simply observe and retreat? The decision was abruptly removed from his control. A slight shift in wind direction carried his scent toward the clearing. The reaction was instantaneous. The girl's head lifted sharply, nostrils flaring. In the moment before she bolted, Miller glimpsed her face clearly for the first time, and the sight struck him with physical force. Beneath the dirt and tangled hair were unmistakably human features, and not just any human, but a face that bore striking resemblance to a daguerreotype he'd seen in a Blackwater Creek merchant's office, a memorial image of the Anderson family, lost in the wilderness years earlier, their daughter approximately the age this wild creature would now be. Before Miller could process this impossible connection, the girl disappeared into the forest with speed that defied his extensive experience with human capabilities. The underbrush swallowed her without leaving obvious trails, her movement so perfectly adapted to the terrain that tracking her would challenge even his considerable skills. James Miller remained motionless long after she vanished, his mind struggling to reconcile what he had witnessed with what he understood of natural law and human capability. If his suspicion proved correct, if this wild creature was indeed Lily Anderson, somehow surviving years in the wilderness, the implications exceeded anything in his experience. More troubling were the questions her existence posed. Should he attempt contact again, report his discovery to authorities in Blackwater Creek, leave this territory immediately to avoid disturbing whatever extraordinary adaptation had allowed her survival? Each option carried profound consequences, not just for himself, but for the feral child whose existence defied all rational explanation. As daylight strengthened across the clearing, Miller finally rose from his position, muscles protesting the long immobility. His decision formed not from careful deliberation, but from instinct deeper than conscious thought, the same instinct that had guided his survival through war and wilderness. "Well, girl," he murmured to the silent forest, "seems we've got some getting acquainted to do." He returned to his campsite, mind already formulating approaches for the unprecedented challenge ahead. How to establish contact with a human child who had seemingly forgotten her own species, a child who might be the sole survivor of a tragedy. Long considered complete, James Miller approached the challenge of contacting the wild girl with the same methodical patience he applied to tracking the most elusive game. Rather than pursuing her directly, An effort he suspected would prove both futile and counterproductive, he focused on creating opportunities for her to observe him from positions of perceived safety. He relocated his camp to a small clearing, with multiple approach routes, deliberately making himself more visible than his usual habits permitted. Each morning he performed routine tasks with exaggerated slowness, building fires, preparing simple meals, cleaning his rifle, while maintaining apparent unawareness of potential observation. Throughout these performances, his senses remained vigilantly tuned to subtle signs of her presence, the unnatural silence of birds, the slight movement of foliage against prevailing winds. "She's learning my patterns," he noted in the journal he'd begun keeping specifically to document this. Extraordinary situation. Watches approximately 2 hours daily, primarily morning, maintains downwind position, distance decreasing gradually, estimated 30 yards today. By the 5th day, Miller implemented the next phase of his strategy. After preparing morning coffee, he deliberately left the remainder in the pot at the edge of his camp before departing, to check traps along the creek. Upon returning several hours later, he noted with satisfaction that the pot had been investigated. Small fingerprints visible in the grounds, the vessel repositioned slightly from its original placement. This established a pattern he carefully maintained for the next week. Each day he left small offerings at increasingly shorter distances from his central camp. First food scraps, then deliberate portions of jerky or dried berries placed on broad leaves. Each offering disappeared during his absences, though he never attempted to observe these retrievals directly. "Building trust requires patience," he wrote. "She must believe approaching is her decision, not my manipulation." The breakthrough came unexpectedly during the second week. Miller had fallen into the habit of speaking aloud while performing camp tasks. His voice kept deliberately low and conversational, partly to accustom the girl to human speech patterns, partly to relieve his own isolation during this unusual vigil. "Should check the south traps today," he remarked to the seemingly empty forest while banking his morning fire. "Beaver Dam's looking promising. Though I'm running low on that coffee, you seem to find it interesting." A sound from the forest edge halted his movements, not retreat but approach, a soft questioning vocalization that resembled no human language, yet clearly communicated curiosity. Miller forced himself to continue his task without looking directly toward the sound, his heart suddenly pounding with anticipation. "Coffee's bitter, unless you add sugar," he continued casually. "Acquired taste, I suppose, like most civilized habits." From the corner of his eye, he caught movement, the girl emerging partially from concealment, her posture balanced between caution and curiosity. She remained quadrupedal, but with head raised, watching his movements with unusual intensity. When Miller slowly reached for his coffee pot, she retreated slightly, but didn't flee completely. "That's fine," he said, deliberately addressing her directly for the first time. "You've got good sense being careful. Took me years to learn that vigilance myself." The girl tilted her head at the sound of his voice, her expression suggesting recognition of communication, if not comprehension of specific words. Miller maintained his unhurried movements, filling the pot with water from his canteen, adding the last of his ground coffee beans with deliberate care. "Should have fresh beans by next supply run," he continued, setting the pot at the fire's edge. "Blackwater Creek store gets them regular now. Town's growing. Too crowded for my taste." Throughout this one-sided conversation, the girl remained partially visible, her attention entirely focused on Miller's activities. Most encouraging was her evident curiosity about his speech, her head tilting at different angles as if attempting to interpret this strange vocalization that differed so dramatically from the animal communications that constituted her primary language. That evening, Miller documented the interaction with unusual detail. First prolonged visual contact today, approximately 10 minutes observation with partial visibility. Estimated age 11 to 12 years. Physical condition appears robust despite unconventional circumstances. Responds to human voice with interest rather than fear. No apparent recognition of language, but clear recognition of communication attempt. The following morning brought unexpected progress. Miller emerged from his shelter to find the girl already present at the forest edge, her body half concealed by underbrush, but her attention fixed upon his camp. When he acknowledged her with a simple nod, she neither approached nor retreated, a silent standoff requiring delicate navigation. "Morning," Miller offered quietly, moving toward his extinguished fire with deliberate slowness. "Might rain today." Clouds building to the west. As he rekindled the fire, he maintained peripheral awareness of her position without direct observation that might trigger retreat. The girl remained at her chosen distance, watching with evident fascination as flames caught the prepared kindling. When Miller placed his coffee pot near the developing fire, she made a soft sound, not quite vocalization, more deliberate than unconscious reaction. "Takes time to brew properly," Miller explained, continuing his one-sided conversation. "Patience yields better results, true for most worthwhile things." To his astonishment, the girl edged slightly closer, maintaining quadrupedal posture, but with increasing confidence in her approach. For the first time, Miller could observe her in adequate detail beyond brief glimpses. What he saw both confirmed his suspicions and complicated them. The copper hair beneath accumulated dirt and tangles, aligned with descriptions of Lily Anderson. The approximate age matched the timeline of the Wagon attack. Most compelling was a distinctive feature mentioned in the memorial daguerreotype's inscription: unusually vivid green eyes that reflected morning light with startling clarity, despite the wild transformation of all other aspects of her appearance. Yet Miller also recognized unmistakable signs of profound adaptation. Her movements displayed no hesitation or awkwardness in quadrupedal locomotion. This was not human mimicry of animal behavior, but genuine integration of that movement pattern into physical development. Her shoulder and back muscles had clearly developed to accommodate this posture, while her forearms showed callousing consistent with bearing weight. Most significant were behavioral aspects that reflected wolf characteristics rather than human. Childhood development, her constant environmental awareness, the systematic way she monitored potential approach routes, her attention to wind direction for scent advantages. These showed learning shaped by canine rather than human prioritization. Miller adjusted his approach accordingly, recognizing that conventional human interaction strategies might prove counterproductive. Rather than increasing verbal engagement or attempting physical proximity, he focused on parallel activity, demonstrating practical tasks while allowing her to observe from her chosen distance. That morning, he prepared a simple breakfast of journey bread and dried meat, deliberately creating a portion that remained conspicuously unattended at the camp's edge while he ate his share. When he later departed to check traps, the extra portion disappeared, as expected. The pattern repeated at midday and evening meals, with the girl's retrieval occurring at progressively shorter intervals after Miller's withdrawal. The following days established a cautious rhythm between the unlikely pair. Each morning, the girl appeared at slightly closer proximity to observe Miller's activities. Each meal included a portion left accessible for her retrieval. Each departure to check traps was followed by her inspection of items left in camp, tools, supplies, and particularly the journal Miller deliberately left visible, though secured from weather. She demonstrates clear reasoning capacity, he noted during evening documentation. Tests boundaries systematically, remembers consequences, shows specific interest in writing materials, watched extensively as I made journal entries yesterday. possible recognition or memory of human written communication. The most significant development occurred on the 10th day of this careful interaction pattern. Miller returned from checking his trapline to find the girl not retreated to forest cover but seated at the edge of his camp, examining objects he deliberately left accessible: a tin cup, a spare knife sheath, a small mirror from his shaving kit. Her posture remained predominantly wolf-like, but her manipulation of these items demonstrated distinctly human dexterity and curiosity. When she noticed his approach, she tensed, but didn't immediately flee. Miller stopped at a considerable distance, deliberately squatting to reduce his threatening height. For several minutes, they regarded each other in silence, the first extended mutual observation without concealment or strategy between them. "Been wondering about your pack," Miller ventured finally, breaking the silence with deliberate gentleness. "Haven't seen signs of wolves nearby. You traveling alone now?" The girl's expression shifted at the word wolves, a subtle but unmistakable reaction that suggested recognition of specific language amid the otherwise incomprehensible speech. She made a soft sound in her throat, not quite vocalization, but clearly responsive. Miller repeated the word carefully. "Wolves, your family. Where are they?" This time her response was more pronounced, a series of small sounds accompanied by a gesture toward the northern ridge line. Communication, however rudimentary, had been established. That night, Miller documented this breakthrough with uncharacteristic excitement. First confirmed communication today. Recognition of specific word, wolves, with appropriate response indicating directional information. Suggests retained comprehension of human language at some level, despite years without use. Remarkable cognitive preservation. With communication initiated, Miller modified his approach. Rather than maintaining their established distance, he began reducing separation through carefully staged proximity. Each morning, he positioned himself slightly closer to where she typically emerged from the forest. Each meal offering was placed nearer to his own position. Each verbal exchange deliberately incorporated words repeated from previous interactions to build vocabulary recognition. The girl responded with increasing comfort to these adjustments, though her movements remained predominantly animal in character. She now approached to within 15 feet during Miller's camp activities, sometimes settling into observation positions, where she remained for hours rather than brief surveillance periods. She continued communicating through gestures and non-verbal sounds, occasionally responding to specific words with distinct reactions that suggested partial comprehension. 2 weeks into this extraordinary relationship, Miller faced a decision. His supplies were dwindling, necessitating a return to Blackwater Creek for replenishment. The journey would require at least 5 days round trip, during which the tenuous connection he'd established might dissolve completely, yet remaining risked resource depletion that would eventually force less planned departure. The evening before his planned departure, Miller attempted to communicate his intentions through both words and gestures. "Need to leave tomorrow," he explained, pointing toward Blackwater Creek's direction and mimicking walking. "Get supplies, food. Return in 5 days." He reinforced this explanation by showing 5 fingers repeatedly, packing some equipment while conspicuously leaving his shelter and larger items in place, and creating a larger-than-usual food offering that suggested extended absence. Whether these efforts conveyed his meaning remained uncertain, given the girl's limited response, intense observation, but minimal acknowledgement. That night, unexpected weather complicated his plans. A powerful autumn storm descended from the mountains, bringing driving rain and plummeting temperatures more typical of late season than the current mid-October conditions. Miller secured his camp as thoroughly as possible before retiring to his shelter, where sleep proved elusive amid howling wind and persistent concern about how such conditions might affect the wild girl. Sometime after midnight, a sound at his shelter entrance brought him instantly alert, hand moving automatically to the knife kept within reach. A different sound followed, not threat but distress, a whimpering communication recognizable from their limited exchanges. When Miller cautiously investigated, he found the girl huddled at his shelter's entrance, soaked and shivering violently. In the unseasonable cold, the moment presented both opportunity and ethical dilemma. The girl clearly sought shelter, a monumental development in trust, yet helping her required crossing boundaries they had carefully negotiated over weeks. Physical proximity might trigger retreat or aggression despite immediate need. Miller made his decision based on practical necessity rather than long-term strategy. "Come in," he said firmly, gesturing toward the shelter's interior. "You'll freeze out there." To his surprise, she responded immediately, crawling into the shelter with desperate gratitude evident in her movements. Once inside, however, she retreated to the furthest corner, watching him with renewed wariness at their unprecedented proximity in confined space. "It's all right," Miller assured her, moving slowly to retrieve a spare blanket from his supplies. "Storm won't last forever." He extended the blanket toward her without approaching further, allowing her to pull it to herself without physical contact between them. Her shivers gradually subsided as the dry covering and shelter protection began counteracting hours of exposure. Throughout this tense arrangement, Miller maintained careful distance within the confined space, understanding that forced proximity during crisis didn't equate to fundamentally changed boundaries. The storm raged through the night and into the following day, rendering Miller's planned departure impossible. This weather-forced extension of their uneasy cohabitation created an unexpected opportunity for accelerated interaction. Confined by practical necessity, they established new patterns, sharing the shelter's limited space with careful delineation of respective territories, communicating through increasingly sophisticated gestures, observing each other with greater detail than previous arrangements had permitted. Most significantly, the girl began demonstrating behaviors that suggested reawakening human characteristics. Her observation of Miller's journal writing produced attempts to create marks using a stick in shelter floor dust. Her attention to his food preparation led to rudimentary imitation, arranging her portions in similar patterns before consumption. When Miller spoke, she increasingly oriented toward his voice, her expressions suggesting active processing rather than mere sound recognition. Remarkable cognitive flexibility, Miller noted during a brief writing session while the girl dozed in her corner. Adaptation works both directions. Animal behaviors adopted for survival, human behaviors re-emerging when the environment permits. Question remains whether transition can be completed after such extended immersion in non-human socialization. The storm finally abated after 2 days, leaving a transformed landscape of mud and broken branches. Miller's departure could no longer be delayed, despite significant evolution in their interaction. That morning, he again attempted to communicate his temporary absence through elaborate pantomime combined with verbal explanation. 5 days, he repeated, showing his hand with fingers extended. "I will return. Stay nearby." The girl watched these demonstrations with evident comprehension beyond previous interactions. When Miller secured his remaining supplies and prepared his pack for travel, she moved to the shelter entrance, her posture communicating tension but not preparation for flight. In a final inspiration, Miller removed his spare shirt, a faded, red flannel well worn but clean, and placed it carefully in the shelter. "Something of mine," he explained, touching the fabric, then pointing to himself. "Until I return." To his astonishment, The girl reached for the garment after minimal hesitation, drawing it toward herself with deliberate care. The gesture represented unprecedented acceptance of human materials beyond immediate necessity. More significantly, it suggested recognition of ownership concepts and symbolic representation, the shirt standing for Miller himself during absence. With preparations complete, Miller departed his camp with conflicted emotions. The probability of the girl remaining nearby seemed greater after their shelter-sharing experience, yet wilderness unpredictability meant no certainty of finding her upon return. The journey to Blackwater Creek carried not just practical necessity, but now ethical weight. Decisions regarding whether to share knowledge of her existence with authorities or maintain the privacy that had protected her unusual development. As he crested the ridge that would take him beyond visual contact with the camp, Miller turned for a final observation. The girl stood at the shelter entrance, his red shirt clutched. In one hand, watching his departure with an expression he couldn't interpret at that distance. Whether her gaze held fear of abandonment, relief at restored independence, or simple observational curiosity remained beyond determination. What seemed increasingly clear, however, was that their extraordinary interaction had begun changing both participants. The wild girl who had survived unimaginable circumstances through adaptation to wolf existence now demonstrated reawakening human characteristics. And James Miller, the solitary hunter who avoided human connection through deliberate isolation, now carried responsibility for another's welfare with all its attendant complications. As he turned toward Blackwater Creek, Miller found himself confronting questions that transcended practical wilderness survival. What constituted humanity when stripped of language and socialization? Could what was lost be recovered? And most troubling, did attempting such recovery serve the girl's interests or merely satisfy human insistence on conformity to recognized patterns? These philosophical concerns accompanied more immediate practical considerations. Supplies needed, potential resources for her accommodation if she remained at camp, approaches to continue building communication bridges between their disparate experiences. Behind all these thoughts lay awareness that his discovery might represent not just personal ethical challenge, but historical significance beyond his ability to properly evaluate alone. 5 days suddenly seemed an eternity for absence from the extraordinary relationship developing in that remote Montana wilderness, a fragile connection between two souls existing at civilization's edge, each changed irrevocably by circumstances beyond conventional understanding. Blackwater Creek had grown considerably since James Miller's last visit 3 months earlier. New construction stretched beyond the original settlement boundaries, with a second saloon competing with the established establishment, a proper 2-story hotel replacing the earlier boarding house, and a dozen new residences scattered along newly formed side streets. The increased population brought a bustle that immediately set Miller's nerves on edge after weeks in wilderness solitude. Miller, Walter Thompson, proprietor of the general store, greeted him with uncharacteristic enthusiasm as he entered the establishment. "Been wondering if wolves got you. Haven't seen your ugly face since August." "Been exploring new territory," Miller replied with non-committal brevity, already assembling mental lists of needed supplies. "North of Griffin's Gorge." "Dangerous country up there," Thompson observed, leaning against his counter with the air of a man eager for conversation. "Blackfoot hunting grounds, or used to be, not to mention the usual mountain hazards." Miller nodded without elaboration, beginning to select items from the store's surprisingly expanded inventory. Coffee beans, salt, ammunition for his rifle, replacement trap parts, essentials that justified his journey while revealing nothing of extraordinary circumstances driving his swift return plans. "Heard any news from those parts?" Thompson pressed, his casual tone belied by sharpened attention. "Strange happenings, animals acting peculiar, that sort of thing." The question raised Miller's internal alarms, its specificity suggesting information beyond idle curiosity. He maintained a neutral expression while considering potential implications. "Just usual wildlife," he answered carefully. "Bears preparing for winter. Wolf packs moving with game migrations. Nothing unusual." Thompson studied him with a shrewd assessment before nodding slowly. "Reason I ask is, Mason's hunting party came back with wild stories last week. Claimed they spotted something unnatural. Up near Cougar Ridge. Not animal, not human. Said it moved on all fours but had a girl's face." Miller's hand paused almost imperceptibly while selecting ammunition, the only external sign of internal reaction. "Mountains make men see strange things," he commented, "especially when whiskey's involved." "That's what most folks figured," Thompson agreed. "But Mason's not usually the superstitious type. Got the military background, likes everything orderly. Not one for tall tales." "Might have seen a bear cub at odd angle," Miller suggested, with deliberate dismissiveness, "or mountain lion from a distance. Mind plays tricks in unfamiliar territory." The conversation shifted to more conventional topics: pricing for beaver, pelts, upcoming winter forecasts, new residents establishing businesses. Throughout these exchanges, Miller maintained his characteristic taciturn demeanor while processing the unsettling implications of Mason's reported sighting. If other hunters had observed the wild girl, even briefly, speculation would spread. Additional expeditions might target the region, specifically seeking confirmation of the unusual story. The girl's safety, previously protected by remote location and implausibility of her existence, could be compromised by increasing curiosity. Miller completed his purchases with focused efficiency, adding items not typically included in his supply runs: extra blankets, simple clothing that might accommodate a small frame, basic medical supplies beyond his usual requirements. When Thompson raised an eyebrow at these selections, Miller offered minimal explanation. "Getting older," he said with calculated self-deprecation. "Winter feels colder each year." That evening, declining offers of companionship at the saloon, Miller secured lodging at the modest hotel. In his small room, he reviewed notes from his journal while considering strategies for the return journey and subsequent interaction with the wild girl. Thompson's information added urgency to decisions previously deemed worthy of extended consideration. If Mason's hunting party had spotted the girl, others would eventually follow. Her extraordinary adaptation to wolf existence, the very feature that had enabled her survival, would make her vulnerable to misunderstanding and potential harm should she be discovered by less thoughtful observers. Commercial exploitation, scientific examination, or simple fear-driven violence all represented possible responses to her unusual circumstances. By morning, Miller had reached conclusions that would fundamentally alter both their lives. He departed Blackwater Creek with first light, traveling at an aggressive pace that prioritized speed over comfort. The 5-day journey compressed to 3 through extended marches and minimal rest periods, driving his body with determination born from growing concern over the girl's safety during his absence. When Miller finally approached his camp on the afternoon of the 3rd day, trepidation battled exhaustion. The possibility of finding the site abandoned seemed equal to prospects of successful return. No smoke rose from his fire pit. No movement disturbed the clearing's natural patterns. The shelter remained intact but showed no signs of recent habitation. "Girl?" he called, using the simple designation that had become his reference for her. "I've returned as promised." Silence answered his announcement. Setting down his heavily laden pack, Miller surveyed the territory with experienced assessment. Fresh wolf tracks marked the clearing's edge, not individual prints, but the overlapping patterns of multiple animals moving with pack coordination. More revealing were human footprints interspersed among them, small impressions that could only belong to the girl, moving among the wolves with apparent coordination. Relief mingled with disappointment. She had survived his absence, evidently, reconnecting with a wolf pack during the interim. This suggested ongoing relationship with her adoptive family rather than complete separation. Yet her absence from camp, despite his promised return, indicated limits to their established connection. Miller established basic camp functions with practiced efficiency despite bone-deep weariness from his accelerated journey. As twilight approached, he prepared a larger-than-usual fire, its light and smoke creating signals visible throughout the surrounding territory. If the girl maintained awareness of the camp location, these indicators would announce his return more effectively than any direct search could accomplish. Darkness had fully claimed the valley when Miller's vigilance detected the approach, not from expected forest edges, but from elevated rock formations at the clearing's northern boundary. Soft sounds that might have escaped less experienced perception indicated careful descent from these formations, suggesting a route deliberately selected for tactical advantage. "I know you're there," Miller said quietly, not turning from his position beside the fire. "Been waiting for you." Movement ceased immediately, followed by extended silence. Miller maintained his deliberately non-threatening posture, gaze fixed on flames rather than attempting visual location of his visitor. Eventually, small sounds resumed, not retreat but continued approach with enhanced caution. When the girl finally entered the firelight's periphery, Miller carefully controlled his reaction to prevent disrupting the delicate moment. Her appearance had altered during his absence in ways that suggested significant developments. She wore his red flannel shirt, not properly as human clothing but draped over her shoulders and secured with crude knots at pressure points. More surprising was a wolf pelt arranged around her lower body in approximation of rudimentary covering. Most notable was her posture, still predominantly quadrupedal, but with greater comfort in transitional movements toward upright positioning. She carried something clutched in one hand, a small object initially unidentifiable in limited light. "You found the pack," Miller observed, deliberately selecting the word she had previously recognized. The girl made soft vocalizations that mimicked wolf communication patterns while gesturing toward northern ridgelines. She approached closer than their pre-departure interactions had typically permitted, settling at the fire's edge with movements that blended animal wariness with increasingly human attention to the flames. In firelight, Miller identified the object she carried, the small mirror from his shaving kit, apparently retrieved from where he had stored it during absence. She extended this toward him with deliberate motion that unmistakably constituted intentional return of property, a concept requiring sophisticated understanding of ownership beyond animal resource defense. "Thank you," Miller said, accepting. "The mirror with appropriate solemnity wasn't necessary, but I appreciate the gesture." The exchange marked remarkable evolution in their relationship, recognition of separation and return, property concepts involving human objects, and symbolic communication through object representation. Most significant was her voluntary return, despite reconnection with the wolf pack, suggesting conscious choice rather than circumstance-driven necessity. That night established new patterns that would characterize subsequent weeks. The girl remained near camp rather than retreating to forest cover, initially maintaining careful distance from the shelter, but gradually accepting proximity as darkness and dropping temperatures encouraged fire-seeking behavior. Miller prepared separate food portions as previously established, but now she consumed these within visual range rather than waiting for his withdrawal. Their communication expanded through Miller's deliberate vocabulary development strategy, consistently. using specific words connected to immediate objects or actions, gradually building recognition through repetition. The girl demonstrated remarkable retention, increasingly responding appropriately to terms like water, fire, food, and sleep. Her own vocalizations remained predominantly non-verbal, though occasionally incorporating sound patterns that suggested attempts at mimicking speech elements. Most encouraging was her evident interest in human implements, tools, containers, clothing, that she investigated with increasingly sophisticated manipulation. Her hands, though bearing calluses from quadrupedal movement, retained fundamental dexterity that allowed object handling beyond animal capability. When Miller demonstrated simple tasks like container filling or food wrapping, she observed with intense focus before attempting imitation. Learning capacity remains intact, Miller noted in journal entries that now incorporate detailed observations of cognitive development. Question shifts from whether human characteristics can re-emerge to how completely and through what progressive stages. Their breakthrough in verbal communication occurred unexpectedly during the third evening after his return. Miller had established a routine of speaking conversationally while performing camp tasks, combining direct instruction with general commentary that exposed her to language patterns beyond simple commands. While arranging firewood for the night, he maintained this practice with observations about approaching weather. "Skies clear now, but clouds are building westward," he remarked. "Might bring snow by morning. Getting late in the season for this elevation." "Sky," came the response, a single word imperfectly formed but unmistakably deliberate, accompanied by an upward gesture. Miller froze momentarily, overcome by the significance of this development. He controlled his reaction to prevent disrupting the moment through excessive response. "Yes, sky," he confirmed, pointing upward to reinforce the connection. "Where clouds form, where the sun travels." "Sky," she repeated more confidently, gaze following his gesture upward before returning to his face with new awareness. This initial verbalization opened channels previously constrained by communication limitations. Over subsequent days, her vocabulary expanded with remarkable speed. Single words initially, then simple word combinations that approximated basic sentences. Water cold, fire warm, Miller come. Each progression demonstrated not just mimicry, but conceptual understanding of language function. Physical development paralleled these cognitive advances. While maintaining quadrupedal movement for rapid travel or retreat situations, she increasingly adopted upright posture during camp activities. Miller observed this transition with professional assessment, noting muscular adjustments and balance compensations that indicated physical adaptation in both directions. Previous adjustment to wolf-like movement now complemented by readaptation to human bipedal positioning. The most profound developments concerned identity formation, the gradual emergence of self-awareness beyond immediate physical needs. This manifested initially through attention to appearance and covering. The crude wolf pelt arrangement evolved into more deliberate body covering as Miller provided simple garments from his Blackwater Creek purchases. While minimally understood, in terms of conventional clothing function, these items were integrated into her developing awareness of human presentation versus animal existence. Most significant was Miller's careful introduction of naming beyond simple object identification. Recognizing the fundamental importance of personal identity to human development, he approached this aspect with particular care. "I'm Miller," he explained during one evening interaction, touching his chest while clearly enunciating, "James Miller, person, human." The girl observed this demonstration with unusual intensity, her expression suggesting processing beyond language acquisition. After consideration, she touched her own chest in mirroring gesture, but remained silent. "You need a name too," Miller continued gently. "All people have names." "Name," she repeated, the concept evidently recognizable, if not fully integrated. Miller faced a profound decision regarding identity designation, whether to introduce Lily Anderson as her historical identity or allow self-selection of new identification. The ethical complexity transcended simple practicality, involving questions of personal history, trauma recovery, and autonomous development that exceeded his expertise. "Your name might be Lily," he offered carefully, watching for recognition. Lily Anderson. No visible reaction suggested memory connection to this designation. The girl repeated Lily with the same mimicry she applied to other new vocabulary, no emotional resonance evident in expression or behavior. "We'll find the right name," Miller assured her, uncertain whether comprehension extended to this abstract concept. No rush on such important matters. Beyond language and identity development, practical concerns increasingly dominated Miller's planning. Weather patterns indicated approaching winter conditions that would make their current arrangement untenable. The simple shelter, adequate for his solitary habitation, couldn't provide sufficient protection for them both during Montana's brutal mountain winters. More critically, food resources would become increasingly scarce as game migrated or hibernated. These practical considerations intersected with broader questions about their unusual relationship's future. The girl's extraordinary development challenged assumptions about human adaptability and recovery potential. Yet her progress, however remarkable, remained fragile, dependent on stability, security, and continued supportive interaction that their current wilderness circumstance couldn't guarantee. Most troubling were ethical questions regarding appropriate next steps. The girl wasn't simply a feral child requiring conventional reintegration. Her years with wolves had created a unique intermediate identity, neither fully human by societal standards nor animal in biological reality. Determining what constituted her best interest required perspective beyond Miller's isolated judgment. A decision point arrived with the first significant snowfall in early November. 3 inches accumulated overnight, transforming their environment, while emphasizing winter's imminent arrival. That morning, Miller found the girl examining snow with typical methodical curiosity, her actions demonstrating memories of previous winter experiences while incorporating new human-influenced investigation. "Patterns. Need to discuss difficult matters," Miller began, seated near her snow examination. "Winter is coming. Too cold here soon. Not safe." Her attention shifted to him immediately, vocabulary recognition evident in focused response. "Safe where?" she asked, a 2-word question representing significant language development. "Have a cabin," Miller explained, gesturing southward. "Down valley, stronger than this shelter, warmer, better for winter." While simplistic, this description conveyed essential information. Alternative shelter offering improved conditions at different location. Miller had rarely mentioned this permanent residence during their interactions, its location serving as his true base, while the current camp functioned as a temporary trapping outpost. "Wolves?" she asked immediately, gesturing toward northern ridgelines with evident concern. The question represented the fundamental challenge of their situation, her continued connection to the adoptive family despite developing human characteristics. Miller considered his response carefully, recognizing pivotal importance to her psychological welfare. "Mountains dangerous for wolves in deep winter," he explained, simplifying complex wildlife management realities. "Pack will move lower, too. Follow deer and elk to valley feeding grounds." "Miller cabin near wolves?" she asked, question formation becoming increasingly sophisticated despite limited vocabulary. "Not exactly near," he acknowledged honestly, "but within territory wolves use during winter. Might see them sometimes." This partial reassurance addressed immediate concern while avoiding false promises. Miller understood the girl's wolf connection. represented not just past survival mechanisms, but genuine bonds formed through years of acceptance and protection. Severing these attachments abruptly would constitute additional trauma, regardless of human development goals. She considered this information with obvious internal conflict. Human language and cognitive processing applied to emotional connections transcending simple categorization. After extended contemplation, she formed a response, combining remarkable concept integration with limited vocabulary. "Girl go Miller cabin," she stated, using third-person self-reference characteristic of early language acquisition. "Cold soon. Need warm." The decision, however simply articulated, demonstrated sophisticated risk assessment, future planning, and conditional adaptation that reflected fundamental human cognitive capabilities emerging from years of suppression. Miller recognized the moment's significance, a conscious choice regarding her future that prioritized survival while acknowledging changing circumstances. "We'll leave tomorrow," he confirmed, matching her direct communication style. "Take important things. Build a new place at cabin." That afternoon, they began preparations for relocation. Miller packing essential supplies while demonstrating selection criteria through verbal explanation. The girl observing with characteristic intensity while attempting mimicry with her limited possessions. These consisted primarily of items accumulated during their interaction: the red flannel shirt, pieces of modified clothing, small objects with apparent significance, including oddly shaped stones and feathers collected during exploration. As sunset approached, the girl departed camp without explanation, moving with purpose toward northern ridgelines. Miller understood without verbal communication. She sought final connection with the wolf pack before their transition to new territory. He deliberately avoided following, recognizing the private nature of this interaction with her adoptive family. She returned after full darkness, moving with uncharacteristic heaviness that suggested emotional processing beyond her verbal expression. Capability. Without explanation, she settled near the fire, physical positioning closer to Miller than their typical arrangement permitted. The symbolic significance wasn't lost on him, seeking human connection after wolf farewell. "They'll always be part of you," Miller offered quietly, unsure how much conceptual understanding his words might convey. "What they taught you, how they protected you, that remains even when separated." Whether she comprehended these abstract concepts remained unclear, but her physical relaxation suggested comfort derived from his attempt at reassurance. That night, as temperatures dropped significantly with the approaching winter system, she accepted shelter proximity previously avoided, sleeping within the structure rather than at fire's edge. Morning brought renewed snowfall as they prepared for departure. Miller secured essential supplies while the girl made the final circuit of their camp clearing, movements suggesting territorial acknowledgement rather than practical necessity. When preparations were complete, she approached the camp's edge facing northern ridgelines. There she produced a sound unlike any Miller had previously witnessed, not human speech attempt, but perfect wolf howl carrying through clear mountain air with haunting clarity. From distant slopes came answering calls, multiple wolves responding to her communication. The exchange continued briefly. Information Miller couldn't interpret, passing between human child and adoptive family across separating distance. When silence finally returned, the girl turned toward Miller with an expression combining resolution with undeniable grief. "Ready now," she stated simply, adopting bipedal posture with deliberate intention. As they departed the clearing that had hosted their extraordinary introduction and relationship development, Miller recognized the journey, represented not just physical relocation, but symbolic transition between worlds. Behind lay her years of wolf existence and survival against impossible odds. Ahead waited uncertain reintegration with human society that would challenge them both in ways impossible to fully anticipate. Between these worlds walked a child neither fully wolf nor completely human, unique bridge between natures typically separated by uncrossable boundaries. And beside her, equally transformed by their unprecedented interaction, traveled a man whose solitary existence had been irreversibly altered by responsibility for this extraordinary ward. Snow continued falling as they moved southward, gradually, erasing their tracks and covering the clearing that had witnessed history's most remarkable adaptation and survival. Only Miller's journal entries preserved evidence of events that transcended conventional understanding, written record of a girl who had survived by becoming something beyond ordinary human capability, now challenged to find balance between worlds that had shaped her unusual existence. Miller's cabin stood in a sheltered valley 3 ridges south of their original camp, positioned to catch winter sunlight while remaining protected from prevailing winds by a natural rock formation. Unlike the crude trapping shelter, this structure represented years of patient craftsmanship. Solid log walls chinked with clay and moss, a proper stone chimney, glass windows salvaged from abandoned mining claims, and a plank floor raised above, ground level to prevent moisture infiltration. For the girl, who had known only forest dens and makeshift shelters, the structure appeared almost incomprehensibly sophisticated. She approached it with visible caution, circling the perimeter multiple times before accepting Miller's invitation to enter. Inside, she moved with exaggerated care, touching walls and furniture with exploratory gestures that combined human curiosity with animal assessment. "Home," Miller explained, using deliberately simple language as he kindled fire in the large stone hearth. "Safe from winter." The cabin's interior reflected its owner's solitary pragmatism, functional furnishings constructed for durability rather than appearance, organized storage that maximized limited space, tools and supplies, arranged with methodical care. A central table with benches dominated the main room. A cast-iron stove supplemented the fireplace for cooking. Pelts and woven blankets covered a sleeping platform in one corner, while shelves lining walls held provisions sufficient for extended isolation during winter months. Most notable to contemporary observation was the cabin's unusual library, one entire wall dedicated to books organized by subject rather than mere alphabetization. Volumes on natural history and wilderness survival shared space with classics of literature, scientific texts, and historical accounts. This collection revealed intellectual depths at odds with Miller's outward presentation as simple frontiersman, evidence of mind that sought understanding beyond immediate practicalities. The girl's reaction to these books proved particularly significant. While other cabin features received cursory investigation, the library wall captured extended attention. She approached the shelves with evident recognition, fingers tracing book spines with deliberate movements, suggesting memory connection rather than mere curiosity. "Books," Miller explained, selecting a volume with simple illustrations of North American wildlife for reading, learning. He opened the book, displaying images of wolves illustrated with reasonable accuracy. The girl's response was immediate and profound. Sharp intake of breath, intensified focus, and reaching gesture that conveyed desire to examine the object herself. Miller surrendered the book carefully, observing as she managed pages with surprising dexterity despite years without practice, her attention fixed entirely on wolf illustrations, fingers tracing outlines with gentle movements that suggested emotional rather than intellectual engagement. "Pack," she said softly, using vocabulary previously established during their interactions. "Family." The moment revealed cognitive connections forming between her lived experience and symbolic representation, a critical developmental bridge between concrete existence and abstract understanding. Miller encouraged this exploration by identifying additional books with animal illustrations, creating an accessible collection for her independent investigation. Their first evening in the cabin established patterns that would characterize subsequent weeks. Miller prepared a more substantial meal than camp conditions had permitted, demonstrating cook stove operation while explaining basic kitchen implements. The girl observed with characteristic intensity, attempting imitation when opportunity presented. Though her movements lacked practiced coordination, underlying comprehension manifested clearly. Watching coffee preparation once allowed successful reproduction of basic steps, suggesting retained procedural memory despite years without exposure. To human activities, sleeping arrangements presented both practical and psychological challenges. Miller had prepared a separate space, converting the storage area into a small private room with improvised bedding. The girl initially rejected this arrangement, preferring a position near the hearth reminiscent of wolf den sleeping patterns. Rather than forcing adjustment, Miller allowed this preference, while introducing bedding materials that gradually acclimated her to human sleeping conventions. "Your choice," he assured her, respecting autonomy while providing alternatives. Bed, available when wanted. Morning revealed the girl exploring cabin surroundings with methodical thoroughness, checking perimeter, investigating outbuildings, establishing mental mapping of territory with both human and wolf-derived assessment patterns. Miller observed without interference, recognizing the importance of environmental familiarity to psychological security. When she disappeared briefly toward a nearby ridgeline, he resisted the impulse to follow, understanding her continuing need, the connection with the natural environment that had sustained her survival. She returned voluntarily after a brief absence, approaching the cabin with increasing confidence that suggested acceptance of this location as new territory rather than merely temporary shelter. Winter's arrival accelerated following their relocation, bringing heavy snowfall that transformed the landscape and emphasized their shelter's importance. The girl watched weather changes with evident understanding of implications, her previous experiences with seasonal extremes clearly evident in preparations she undertook without specific instruction, gathering additional firewood before storms, adjusting sleeping position to maximize heat conservation, monitoring wildlife movements that indicated weather pattern changes. These adaptive behaviors demonstrated sophisticated integration of wolf-derived survival knowledge with emerging human cognition, utilizing best elements of both experiential frameworks to navigate environmental challenges. Miller documented these observations carefully, his journal entries noting developmental progresses that defied conventional child development sequences. Demonstrates reasoning capacity well beyond vocabulary limitations, he recorded, anticipates consequences 3 or 4 steps beyond immediate conditions. Integration of past experience with current circumstances suggests intact cognitive architecture despite years without human language structure. Communication development proceeded rapidly within the cabin environment, which provided a consistent opportunity for vocabulary acquisition through direct object association. The girl's spoken language expanded from single words to simple sentences. Within weeks, though grammatical structure remained rudimentary and third-person self-reference continued. Girl hungry. Snow deep today. Miller fixed door. More significant than mechanical language acquisition was conceptual understanding development, moving from concrete object identification to abstract concept recognition. Weather patterns, time sequences, emotional states, and causal relationships gradually entered her expressive capability, suggesting cognitive frameworks far exceeding vocabulary limitations. Physical transformation paralleled these cognitive developments. Regular meals and shelter protection resulted in visible health improvements, weight stabilization, improved skin condition, enhanced stamina during activities. More notable was progressive adoption of bipedal posture as primary movement pattern. While she retained capacity for quadrupedal movement during outdoor exploration, upright positioning increasingly dominated indoor activities. This transition required physical adaptation Miller hadn't fully anticipated. Years of predominantly quadrupedal movement had developed musculature and skeletal alignment significantly different from typical human patterns. Back pain and balance challenges accompanied her increasing bipedal preference, requiring patience and accommodation during adjustment period. Human body is remarkably adaptive, Miller noted after observing her determined efforts to maintain upright walking despite evident discomfort. Reorganizing physical capabilities in both directions suggests fundamental developmental flexibility exceeding conventional understanding. Their daily routine established balance between necessary survival activities and developmental opportunities. Mornings typically involved practical tasks, food preparation, cabin maintenance, gathering supplies. Afternoons often centered on explicit learning activities Miller developed based on observed interests and capabilities. These informal lessons began with fundamental skills, proper tool handling, functional reading, focused on essential vocabulary, basic numeracy using practical applications like supply counting. The girl approached these activities with extraordinary focus, her capacity for sustained attention exceeding typical childhood patterns. Once demonstrated, skills rarely required repetition before implementation, suggesting exceptional retention. Capability despite years without formal learning structure. Most remarkable was her accelerated reading development. Beginning with simple word recognition, she progressed to basic sentence comprehension within weeks rather than months, typical for conventional literacy acquisition. Miller's teaching approach emphasized functional application rather than abstract rules, connecting written language directly to immediate environment and experiences. Read to survive, he explained while introducing instructional materials. Names, directions, warnings, important information comes through reading. This practical framing resonated with her survival-oriented cognition, motivation-enhancing, already substantial aptitude. By December, barely a month after cabin relocation, she could independently read simple texts and identify essential vocabulary in more complex materials. This capability dramatically expanded available stimulation during isolated winter conditions, books becoming increasingly important in daily activities. Despite these remarkable adaptations, distinct wolf-derived behaviors remained evident throughout daily functioning. Heightened sensory vigilance characterized her environmental interactions. Constant attention to sounds, scents, and movements outside human perceptual priorities. Food preferences retained carnivorous emphasis despite Miller's introduction of varied nutrition. Sleep patterns followed crepuscular rhythms rather than conventional human schedules, heightened activity occurring at dawn and dusk regardless of established routines. Most notably, her emotional expression continued blending human and wolf communication patterns. While verbal language increasingly conveyed basic needs and observations, complex emotional states manifested through wolf-derived vocalizations and body language, whines expressing discomfort or uncertainty, throat rumbles indicating contentment, physical positioning communicating hierarchical recognition or submission. These hybrid communication patterns created interpretive challenges even as general understanding improved between them. Miller developed increasing sensitivity to non-verbal indicators through careful observation and pattern recognition, gradually establishing a comprehensive communication system that incorporated elements from both human and wolf expression modalities. December advanced with intensifying winter conditions, bringing extended periods of confinement within cabin boundaries. These circumstances accelerated language development through concentrated interaction while creating psychological adjustments for both individuals. The girl, accustomed to expansive territory despite seasonal limitations, experienced occasional restlessness, requiring Miller's creative adaptation of indoor activities. Miller himself, habitually solitary during winter months, adjusted to constant companionship requiring conscious attention to another's needs beyond his own preferences. The most significant development during this period involved naming and identity, transition from generalized reference, girl, to individualized identification that recognized personhood rather than categorical existence. Miller introduced this concept carefully, recognizing its fundamental importance to human psychological development while respecting autonomy in self-identification. People have special names, he explained during the evening reading session focused on simple story with named characters. Not just girl or man, but specific sounds meaning only them. She demonstrated unmistakable comprehension, attention intensifying beyond typical learning focus. Miller, special name, she confirmed, indicating understanding of the concept. Yes, James Miller, my specific name. He hesitated before continuing. You might have had a name before, Lily Anderson. The suggestion produced no recognition response, despite careful observation for reaction. Miller proceeded with an alternative approach that emphasized self-determination rather than historical recovery. Could choose a name for yourself, he offered. Any sound you want as a special word for you alone. This possibility generated evident consideration, her expression suggesting internal processing beyond immediate response capability. The matter remained unresolved through subsequent days, periodically revisited during quiet moments, without pressure for immediate decision. The breakthrough occurred unexpectedly during a late December blizzard that confined them entirely within cabin boundaries for 3 consecutive days. While examining an illustrated book depicting various North American ecosystems, she paused at the woodland waterfall image, attention focusing with unusual intensity. Willow, she stated firmly, touching. Illustration showing slender trees alongside flowing water. Name Willow. The self-selection carried significance beyond simple designation. Rather than selecting wolf-associated terminology or attempting recovery of original human identity, she chose a natural element representing transition between environments, flexible trees requiring both solid grounding and adaptability to survive alongside powerful water forces. Willow, Miller confirmed, recognizing the importance of honoring this self-determination. Good name, strong but flexible, survives difficult conditions. From that day forward, Willow replaced generic references in their interactions. Miller, consistently using chosen designation rather than historical Lily, despite documentation certainty regarding her original identity. This respect for autonomous identification represented fundamental recognition of her personhood beyond mere rehabilitation, object, or scientific curiosity. January brought brief weather moderation, allowing limited exploration beyond immediate cabin surroundings. These excursions revealed Willow's continuing connection with the natural environment, despite increasing human characteristic development. Her tracking abilities exceeded Miller's considerable skills, perception identifying animal signs invisible to conventional human observation. Wildlife responded to her presence differently than typical human encounters, wariness tempered by recognition that registered her unique status between categories. Most significant was an unexpected wolf encounter during valley exploration. Tracks suggesting pack presence had been evident for several days before visual confirmation occurred, 4 wolves observing from a ridgeline above their position. Miller tensed instinctively, uncertain whether territorial defense might overcome. Willow's previous pack connections. His concern proved unnecessary as interaction unfolded with extraordinary sensitivity. Willow approached the wolf group with deliberate movements, combining human upright posture with wolf communication signals. Head positioning, ear and tail presentation mimicked through human body adaptation, vocalizations that precisely matched wolf greeting patterns despite anatomical differences. The wolves responded with evident recognition, not of pack member, but acknowledged entity deserving communication rather than threat response. The exchange continued briefly through distance-appropriate signals before the pack departed, without hostility or submission gestures. Different pack, Willow explained afterward, her assessment reflecting sophisticated understanding of territorial boundaries and wolf social structures. Not family, but accept Willow near. This encounter demonstrated her developing integration of dual identities, not forsaking wolf connection while embracing human development, but establishing a unique, intermediary position, acknowledging both aspects of her extraordinary background. Miller documented this interaction with particular attention to implications for identity development and potential future adaptations. Demonstrates capacity for dual framework functioning, he noted. Maintains wolf communication capability, while developing human language and conceptual understanding. Suggests potential for integration rather than replacement of cognitive structures, expanding rather than exchanging operational frameworks. February brought increased social complications as winter conditions modified surrounding area activities. Logging operations several miles southwest of Miller's cabin expanded during favorable weather periods, bringing work crews closer to their isolated location than previous patterns had established. Tracks indicating human exploration appeared occasionally near cabin vicinity, raising concerns about potential discovery before Willow's condition and capabilities could be adequately explained to outside observers. These concerns manifested during late February supply expedition to remote trading post, Miller periodically utilized during winter months when Blackwater Creek proved inaccessible. Thomas Weber, the post's proprietor, greeted Miller with typical gruff acknowledgement before, offering unusual commentary. "Heard you got company up at your place," Weber remarked, while assembling Miller's requested provisions. "Blake's logging crew spotted smoke from 2 fires rather than your usual single chimney output. Said tracks around your territory look different." 2. Miller maintained neutral expression despite internal alarm at this information. "Taking on apprentice," he improvised, creating plausible explanation for observed anomalies. Young trapper learning winter survival methods. Weber's skeptical expression suggested limited acceptance of this explanation. "Must be dedicated, choosing isolation with a notorious hermit like yourself." He paused before adding casually, "Strange." Stories still circulating after Mason's hunting party, some saying Wild Child might be Anderson girl from Wagon attack years back. The direct reference to possibilities Miller had hoped remained speculative, confirmed spreading interest in unusual sightings. Weber's deliberate introduction of the topic suggested information networks extending beyond casual observation, coordinated curiosity potentially developing into organized investigation. "People need winter tales," Miller responded dismissively. "Makes long nights pass easier. Anderson massacre was complete from what I heard. No survivors found despite considerable searching." "That's historical fact," Weber acknowledged, "but historical facts sometimes need revision when new evidence appears. Mason's no fool, and he swears what he saw had human characteristics despite animal behaviors." This conversation highlighted accelerating timeline pressures regarding Willow's situation. Winter isolation had provided development opportunity without external complications, but approaching spring would bring increased human activity throughout surrounding territories. Decisions regarding longer-term arrangements could no longer be postponed indefinitely despite continuing developmental progress. Returning to the cabin, Miller found Willow engaged in independent reading, activity that now occupied significant portions of her daily routine. The contrast between her concentrated focus on human knowledge acquisition and Weber's descriptions of wild child sightings emphasized extraordinary adaptation already accomplished, while highlighting distance yet remaining before conventional social integration might become possible. "Need to discuss difficult matters," Miller began, after completing the supply organization. "More people in forests when snow melts. Questions about you are already spreading through the area." Willow's comprehension of complex social implications remained limited despite significant language development, but fundamental understanding of secrecy necessity had been established through consistent explanation. "People are afraid of different," she stated, demonstrating conceptual grasp beyond vocabulary limitations. "Some would be," Miller confirmed. "Others might want to study you, separate you from familiar surroundings. Few would understand your special circumstances without proper preparation." This conversation initiated a planning process that would ultimately determine their future beyond isolated winter arrangement. Options appeared severely limited given extraordinary circumstances, continued isolation risking eventual discovery. Unprepared, while premature social introduction risked consequences neither could fully anticipate or control. As February yielded to early March thaws, their temporary sanctuary between worlds faced increasing external pressures. Miller's journal entries during this period reflected growing awareness that wilderness isolation, however beneficial for initial rehabilitation, represented an unsustainable interim rather than permanent solution to Willow's unprecedented situation. The remarkable child who had survived through wolf adaptation now faced challenges potentially more complex than original wilderness abandonment, navigating human society with understanding shaped by experiences beyond conventional comprehension. Her extraordinary journey had only reached intermediate destinations rather than conclusion, future chapters remaining unwritten as spring approached their mountain valley sanctuary. The first substantial thaw arrived in mid-March, transforming frozen landscape into flowing rivulets that carved channels through diminishing snowbanks. Birds returned to valley territories, their morning songs replacing winter's silence. Hibernating creatures emerged from dens, stretching and foraging in warming sunlight. The world awakened with vibrant energy that affected both cabin inhabitants. Profoundly, Willow responded to seasonal transition with visible excitement tempered by evident apprehension. Her outdoor explorations expanded in duration and distance as weather permitted, investigating territory changes with methodical thoroughness. Characteristic of both wolf assessment and human curiosity, these expeditions provided critical physical exercise after winter confinement, while re-establishing environmental connection essential to her psychological well-being. Miller observed these activities with mixed emotions. Appreciation for her obvious joy in renewed freedom, balanced against increasing concern regarding potential discovery by others, similarly liberated by improving conditions. Logging operations southwest of their location resumed full activity. Hunting parties ventured further into territories previously restricted by winter limitations. Their protected isolation dissolved with each passing day. These circumstances necessitated difficult conversations about future arrangements, discussions taxing Willow's developing language capabilities and conceptual understanding beyond immediate experience. Miller approached these matters with careful preparation, selecting vocabulary accessible to her current development while addressing complex implications. "More people are coming to the forest soon," he explained during an evening meal in late March. Need plans for safety. Options have different advantages, different problems. Willow's comprehension of abstract planning had developed significantly during winter months, her response demonstrating conceptual grasp beyond immediate circumstances. Hide from people or meet people? The simple question encapsulated the fundamental decision facing them: continued isolation versus controlled introduction to wider society. Miller outlined options with appropriate simplicity while respecting her developing autonomy. Could move deeper into the wilderness, he suggested. Mountains have many remote valleys. Build a new cabin where others rarely travel. Continue as we are now, but with greater separation from settlements. Willow considered this possibility with characteristic thoroughness, her expression reflecting active processing rather than mere reaction. Always hiding, she observed, identifying key limitation with remarkable insight. True, Miller acknowledged. Alternative involves selective introduction to others, carefully chosen people who might understand your special circumstances, perhaps starting with a doctor who could document your condition properly. This option represented significantly greater risk, coupled with potential benefits impossible. Through continued isolation, proper medical assessment might establish legal identity documentation currently lacking. Educational resources beyond Miller's capabilities could accelerate development already progressing remarkably. Most significantly, controlled disclosure might prevent accidental discovery under less favorable circumstances. "Doctor, help Willow become more person?" she asked. Phrase structure reflecting continuing language limitations despite conceptual sophistication. "Doctor could confirm you're healthy, create official records," Miller explained. "Might help others understand your special history without fear or misunderstanding." Their discussion continued through subsequent evenings, exploring implications beyond immediate decision. Miller described potential societal reactions spanning from scientific interest to exploitative curiosity, religious interpretation to medical objectification. Throughout these conversations, he maintained a balanced presentation rather than directing toward personal preference, recognizing the fundamental importance of self-determination despite her developmental limitations. "Your choice matters most," he emphasized repeatedly. "Your life, your future." This respect for autonomy represented significant evolution in their relationship, progression from initial rescue operation through rehabilitation supervision to partnership, acknowledging her developing personhood despite unconventional circumstances. Willow's decision-making capacity had expanded beyond immediate survival considerations to incorporate long-term planning and abstract consequence evaluation, demonstrating cognitive maturation that transcended vocabulary limitations. While deliberations continued without definitive conclusion, practical preparations proceeded for contingencies regardless of ultimate direction. Miller increased Willow's exposure to human conventions likely to facilitate potential social integration. Clothing utilization, eating methods, hygiene practices, and conversational patterns received heightened attention during daily activities. Most crucial was communication development focused on explaining her extraordinary history without triggering fear or disbelief. Miller created practice scenarios requiring increasingly sophisticated self-description with appropriate terminology. "If someone asks where you're from, how would you answer?" he prompted during these exercises. "Raised by wolves after family." "Killed," Willow responded, developing a concise explanation, balancing honesty with comprehensible narrative. "Miller found me in forest, teaching me human ways again." These rehearsals addressed practical communication challenges while simultaneously strengthening her self-concept integration, connecting past wilderness existence with emerging human identity through coherent narrative construction. The process proved therapeutic beyond practical preparation, establishing psychological continuity across dramatically different life circumstances. April arrived with decisively spring conditions, necessitating implementation of immediate security measures, while longer-term decisions remained under consideration. Miller established boundary markings surrounding cabin territory, subtle indications recognizable to experienced woodsmen as property declarations without drawing unnecessary attention. These perimeter warnings provided advance notification of potential approach, creating buffer zone for preparation or concealment depending on circumstances. Willow's outdoor activities adapted accordingly, restricted to carefully defined territories unlikely to experience casual incursion. Her extraordinary environmental awareness provided an additional security layer, perception often detecting human approach before conventional signs became evident to normal observation. Despite these precautions, inevitable contact occurred sooner than anticipated. In late April, Miller returned from checking traplines to find Willow in unusual agitation, moving rapidly between observation positions with evident alarm rather than typical methodical assessment. "Men coming," she reported immediately upon his arrival. 3 men, guns, dogs. The description suggested hunting party rather than deliberate search, but timing forced immediate decision regarding appropriate response. Insufficient preparation. Time remained for complete concealment. Weather conditions made Willow's tracking extremely visible to experienced woodsmen. Most critically, dogs would inevitably detect her distinctive scent, regardless of physical hiding efforts. "Inside cabin," Miller directed. Decision reflecting calculated risk assessment. Normal activities. Follow practiced responses. This approach, presenting controlled appearance rather than suspicious absence, represented a significant gamble dependent upon Willow's developing social capabilities. Her previous rehearsals had occurred within a supportive environment rather than genuine interaction. Stress. Whether preparation would prove sufficient remained uncertain as approaching voices became audible outside cabin boundaries. Miller busied himself with ordinary tasks, coffee preparation on wood stove, equipment cleaning at the central table, while maintaining reassuring verbal commentary for Willow's benefit. She positioned herself near the cabin's small library, posture demonstrating appropriate human characteristics, despite obvious tension evident in heightened sensory vigilance. Knock. At cabin door arrived with jarring finality despite anticipated approach. Miller opened the entry with a deliberately casual manner that concealed heightened alertness beneath the frontier hospitality veneer. 3 men stood in a cleared yard, hunting attire marking recreational sportsmen rather than subsistence providers. Equipment quality, suggesting financial comfort beyond typical frontier resources. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a premium rifle and silver-trimmed hunting vest, displayed immediate recognition. "Miller? James Miller?" he inquired with surprise evident in expression. "Didn't realize this was your property." "Mason. Blackwell, we met at Thompson's trading post last autumn." The identification confirmed Miller's concerns. This wasn't a random hunting party, but an expedition with specific interest in regional anomalies. Mason's hunting group had reported initial sightings that spawned spreading rumors throughout territory. Their presence in this specific location suggested deliberate investigation rather than coincidental trespassing. "Blackwell," Miller acknowledged with practiced neutrality. "Bit far from typical hunting grounds." Following interesting tracks, Mason replied, gaze shifting toward the cabin interior with poorly concealed curiosity. "Unusual patterns we've observed periodically throughout winter. Thought worth investigating, given certain stories circulating since last autumn." The intentional reference to previous sightings confirmed suspicion regarding their presence. Miller maintained composed expression while calculating appropriate response, balancing protection against provocative denial that might heighten interest. "Coffee's hot," he offered instead, frontier hospitality providing temporary deflection. Weather's turning, storm front is approaching from the northwest. Mason accepted the invitation with evident eagerness exceeding simple refreshment interest. As the hunting party entered the cabin interior, their attention immediately focused on Willow's presence near bookshelves. Her appearance, now predominantly human in presentation, despite occasional movement patterns revealing unusual background, clearly surprised visitors expecting either conventional companion or complete absence. "My apologies," Mason stated with exaggerated courtesy, belied by intense observation. "Didn't realize you had family visiting?" The deliberate mischaracterization invited correction or elaboration. Tactical conversation approach seeking information. Through social convention exploitation, Miller recognized the manipulation attempt but acknowledged introduction necessity given the circumstances. "Willow," he stated simply, allowing her practiced self-introduction while establishing appropriate name recognition. "Hello," Willow responded, pronunciation careful and deliberate as practiced during winter preparation. "Pleased meeting you." Grammatical imperfection remained evident despite significant language development, but fundamental communication competence demonstrated human functionality transcending wild child expectations, likely anticipated based on previous sightings. Mason's expression registered surprise, quickly masked by social convention. "Pleasure's mine," he replied, attention intensifying. Despite the casual tone, "Haven't seen you during previous visits to the territory. Recently arrived." The question represented a deliberate probe, seeking confirmation of suspicions regarding unusual tracks and observations throughout the winter period. Willow's response followed a rehearsed narrative developed for precisely such inquiry. "Staying with Miller," she stated simply, balancing honest disclosure against excessive detail. "Learning many things." Miller provided coffee to visitors while maintaining position, allowing intervention if questioning exceeded Willow's preparation. The hunting party settled at central table, conversation ostensibly focused on seasonal conditions and wildlife, movements while actually conducting careful observation of Willow's behaviors and responses. "Unusual season," Mason commented, attention divided between apparent topic and Willow's movements as she retrieved cups from the cabinet. Game patterns changed significantly from previous years, tracking showing strange combinations we've never encountered before. The indirect reference to Willow's distinctive track patterns, human footprints interspersed with quadrupedal movement indicators, demonstrated sophisticated interrogation techniques using apparent small talk to introduce targeted information gathering. Miller intercepted this approach with deliberate topic redirection. "Logging operations affecting traditional migrations," he observed, shifting conversation toward known environmental factors. "Watershed changes too with last summer's beaver dam collapses, everything connected in natural systems." Mason acknowledged this redirection with a slight smile, indicating recognition of protective maneuver. "Indeed. Speaking of connections, been meant to ask about historical knowledge regarding these territories, particularly interested in settler incidents from previous decades." The conversation pivot toward explicit wagon attack reference exceeded subtle implication, approaching direct confrontation regarding Willow's potential identity. Before Miller could intercept this development, Willow herself responded with surprising directness. "Family killed when small," she stated calmly, using prepared narrative elements with appropriate application. "Survived alone until Miller found me." The simple statement, delivered without elaboration or emotional emphasis, created momentary silence among visitors. Mason studied her with intensity, transcending casual interest, professional assessment evident in systematic observation of movement. Patterns, speech characteristics, and physical indicators suggesting unconventional development. "Remarkable survival story," he finally commented, tone suggesting multiple interpretations of remarkable beyond simple appreciation. "Must have been quite challenging until Mr. Miller's fortunate intervention." "Willow strong," she replied, with dignity transcending vocabulary limitations. "Learn fast now." This exchange established fundamental narrative parameters while providing minimal confirmation of extraordinary circumstances. Miller observed Mason processing this information with evident calculation, connecting previously observed tracking anomalies with Willow's presentation and limited explanation into coherent, if incomplete, understanding. Rather than pressing for additional details, Mason shifted approach toward establishing ongoing access through seemingly benign sociability. "We make regular hunting expeditions throughout this region. Would welcome the opportunity to visit again, perhaps bring supplies difficult to transport from distant settlements." The offer represented a transparent attempt to establish legitimate reason for return visitation, combination of frontier courtesy and personal interest, providing a social framework for continued investigation. Miller recognized the manipulation attempt, but acknowledged inevitable social contact now that initial discovery had occurred. "Always welcome coffee visitors," he responded with deliberate neutrality. "Game information is valuable for trapping preparations too." This limited acknowledgement neither encouraged nor explicitly rejected future interaction, maintaining boundary control while avoiding confrontational stance that might heighten curiosity. Mason accepted this qualified response with apparent satisfaction, conversation shifting toward genuinely practical matters: weather predictions, trail conditions, regional wildlife movements, before the hunting party departed with appropriate frontier farewells. Once visitors moved beyond hearing range, Miller and Willow exchanged assessment of this critical interaction, their first managed social contact beyond themselves. Willow demonstrated remarkable perceptiveness regarding underlying dynamics despite limited social experience. "Man very interested in Willow," she observed, "not saying complete thoughts." "Mason Blackwell," Miller confirmed, "businessman from Helena with mining interests. Also serves as territorial militia captain. Intelligent, connected, and now aware of your existence." This concise assessment summarized transformation in their circumstances: isolation irretrievably compromised by direct contact with influential individual possessing resources and motivation for continued investigation. Their theoretical deliberations regarding controlled disclosure versus continued secrecy had been superseded by practical reality, requiring immediate adaptation. "What happens now?" Willow asked, question demonstrating conceptual understanding of consequential cascades beyond immediate interaction. Miller considered their position with characteristic thoroughness before responding. "Changes become necessary. Mason will return, possibly with others having different interests. Need to establish proper documentation and protection before that happens." This assessment initiated urgent implementation of contingency plans previously considered hypothetical. Rather than abstract possibilities, legitimate identification, medical documentation, and legal protection became immediate necessities for Willow's security and well-being. That evening, Miller's journal entry reflected profound recognition of transformed circumstances. First contact managed without disaster, but with significant consequences. W performed admirably despite limited preparation, followed guidance while demonstrating authentic self-determination appropriate to circumstances. Blackwell's interest is obvious and concerning, given resources and connections, must accelerate the documentation process before speculation generates uncontrolled curiosity from less reasonable parties. Throughout subsequent days, Miller observed the vigilance perimeter for signs of continued observation or secondary visitation while preparing necessary departure for Blackwater Creek. This journey, previously postponed due to preparation concerns, became unavoidable following direct contact with individuals connected to broader regional networks. Willow's response to these developments demonstrated remarkable adaptability despite limited social experience. Rather than retreating toward wolf-derived behaviors under stress, she intensified human practice activities. Clothing utilization, speech pattern refinement, and social interaction rehearsals occupied increased attention during daily routines. "Going to settlement with Miller?" she asked during preparation discussions, question containing multiple implications regarding trust, courage, and developmental readiness. Miller considered options with appropriate seriousness, balancing protection against development opportunities. "Initial visit by myself alone," he explained. "Establish connections with appropriate individuals, doctor, legal representative, perhaps territorial administrator. Create a foundation for your introduction under controlled circumstances." This approach prioritized security while acknowledging the inevitable broadening social circle now that Willow's existence had been confirmed by credible witnesses. Documentation establishing legal identity and protection must precede general knowledge to prevent potential exploitation by commercial, religious, or pseudo-scientific interests. As April concluded with accelerating spring transformation throughout valley ecosystems, parallel transformation occurred within their small human ecosystem. The isolated rehabilitation partnership established during winter months evolved toward outward-facing preparation for social integration. Limited but intentional, rather than complete withdrawal from human contact. Willow herself demonstrated a remarkable perspective regarding these unprecedented circumstances. Observation during evening reading sessions revealing philosophical depth, transcending vocabulary limitations. "Not wolf anymore," she stated while examining illustrated natural history text. "Not a complete person yet, something between seeing both worlds differently." The insight captured the fundamental reality of her extraordinary existence. Bridge. Between environments typically separated by impermeable boundaries, perspective incorporating survival understanding from predator existence alongside developing human cognition and social awareness. Miller recognized profound significance in this self-assessment. "Most people only know one world," he acknowledged. "Your experience gives a unique understanding that is impossible for others. Valuable perspective if properly respected." This exchange encapsulated the core challenge facing their unprecedented situation, protecting Willow's extraordinary development and perspective while facilitating sufficient conventional integration for security and growth opportunities. The wilderness child rescued from complete isolation required connection without destroying unique characteristics developed through unprecedented adaptation. As May approached with summer's promise, visible in emerging vegetation and lengthening days, Miller prepared the necessary journey to Blackwater Creek with a carefully constructed strategy for managing Willow's introduction to wider society. Documentation, legal protection, and carefully selected initial contacts would establish a foundation for controlled integration, permitting continued development without exploitation or misunderstanding. The remarkable child who had survived through wolf adaptation now approached the next extraordinary transition, from isolated rehabilitation toward limited but meaningful participation in human society that had nearly forgotten her existence. Whether this transition would preserve her unique perspective while providing necessary protection remained uncertain as spring transformation continued throughout Montana's mountain wilderness. 5 years passed since that autumn day when James Miller first glimpsed a wild-eyed girl moving with wolf-like grace through the Montana wilderness. Those years brought changes neither could have anticipated during those first tentative interactions at the trapping camp clearing. Blackwater Creek had grown into a proper town with a schoolhouse, church, and even a small newspaper documenting territorial developments. The mining operations had stabilized into sustainable industry rather than boom and bust speculation. Logging companies had established managed harvesting practices after early excesses threatened watershed stability. Civilization's advance had transformed the region in ways both beneficial and concerning. Through these transformations, Willow had crafted a unique existence balancing between worlds. Now approximately 16 years old, she had developed remarkable integration of her dual experiences, the academic knowledge gained through dedicated study complemented by wilderness wisdom impossible through conventional education. Her appearance no longer triggered immediate notice in community settings. The copper hair, once matted beyond recognition, now fell in neat braids or practical arrangements appropriate for various activities. Her clothing, while selected for function over fashion, met community standards without drawing undue attention. Most significantly, her movements had found middle ground between wolf-derived efficiency and human social convention, distinctive in careful observation, but not immediately alarming to casual notice. Language development had progressed beyond anyone's expectations, including Dr. Harrison's professional assessment. While occasional grammatical irregularities revealed her unusual background during extensive conversations, basic interactions proceeded without indication of extraordinary history. More remarkable was her written expression, which had advanced from rudimentary literacy to sophisticated articulation, surpassing many lifelong settlement residents. The territorial administration had formalized her legal status through documentation, combining available historical evidence with contemporary testimony. Officially, she was Lily Willow Anderson, sole survivor of documented Wagon attack with associated property rights to original Anderson land claim. This legal recognition provided protection against exploitation while establishing legitimate position within territorial society. Most significant transformation concerned Willow's role within the community. Rather than remaining a permanent outsider or curiosity object, she had developed a respected position based on unique capabilities and perspective. Local hunters sought her tracking expertise before difficult expeditions. Families experiencing livestock predation consulted her regarding wolf behavior patterns and deterrent strategies. Dr. Harrison occasionally requested her assistance with patients requiring specialized pain management techniques derived from wolfpack injury response patterns she had observed and adapted to human application. This community integration succeeded precisely because it honored rather than suppressed her extraordinary background. Unlike conventional rehabilitation approaches that might have demanded complete abandonment of wolf-derived characteristics, Blackwater Creek's frontier pragmatism recognized practical value in her unique perspective. This acceptance allowed authentic identity development, integrating all aspects of her remarkable journey rather than compartmentalizing or rejecting critical experiences. Miller observed these developments with quiet satisfaction while adjusting his own role appropriately. Their relationship had evolved from rescuer-survivor dynamic toward partnership incorporating mutual respect for distinct capabilities. His cabin remained their primary residence, but operational arrangements had shifted toward collaborative decision-making rather than protective oversight. Educational guidance continued through selected materials and discussion, but direction increasingly originated from Willow's self-determined interests rather than externally imposed curriculum. Most significant was Miller's careful transition from primary protector toward supportive partnership, enabling independent functioning. Where earlier years required constant vigilance against potential exploitation or misunderstanding, current circumstances permitted greater autonomy as Willow developed personal judgment regarding appropriate disclosure and interaction boundaries. Considering territorial school examinations next spring, Willow announced during an autumn hunting expedition near the original meeting location. The assessment would provide official educational certification typically completed by students. Following a conventional schooling path, Harrison believes you'll succeed easily, Miller replied, recognition of her academic progress evident in his matter-of-fact tone. Might open additional opportunities if desired. This exchange reflected their evolved communication style, direct discussion of practical matters without excessive elaboration or emotional emphasis. Years of shared experience had created understanding transcending conventional conversation, requirements allowing substantive exchange through minimal verbal interaction. Considering future possibilities, Willow continued, discussing long-term planning previously managed primarily through Miller's protective oversight. Anderson Property Claim offers development options. Territorial University accepting female students now. These considerations demonstrated a remarkable developmental trajectory from wolf child survival to academic aspirations within a half-decade timeframe. While typical adolescents contemplated future options based on family expectations or community patterns, Willow's planning incorporated extraordinary perspective, drawing from both wilderness wisdom and human knowledge systems. Many paths available, Miller acknowledged, respecting autonomy while offering experienced perspective, no requirement to select single direction immediately. This balanced guidance characterized their current relationship: support without direction, information without demand, respect for autonomous decision-making despite unconventional background. Miller had transitioned from rescuer to mentor, from protector to advocate, adjustments reflecting her remarkable development while honoring continuing connection between them. Their expedition reached the original meeting clearing by mid-afternoon, an annual pilgrimage commemorating the transformation beginning point. Natural reclamation had accelerated since previous visit. Trapping camp location now identifiable only through subtle vegetation patterns recognizable to experienced observation. Wildlife had reclaimed territory through seasonal cycles, erasing evidence of brief human occupation. As tradition established through previous anniversaries, they made camp in this significant location, not for practical hunting necessity, but symbolic acknowledgement of an extraordinary journey originating from an unexpected encounter. Evening conversation around a small fire addressed philosophical considerations, typical of these commemorative visits. Sometimes wonder about different outcomes, Willow reflected, rare retrospective consideration prompted by significant location. If wolves hadn't found me, if you hadn't investigated strange tracks. Pointless speculation, Miller responded with characteristic practicality. Reality provides sufficient considerations without imaginary alternatives. This exchange illustrated the fundamental difference between typical human preoccupation with hypothetical possibilities versus wolf-derived focus on immediate environmental reality, philosophical distinction reflecting their complementary perspectives despite years of shared experience. As darkness settled across the clearing, familiar sounds emerged from surrounding forest. Nocturnal creatures resuming activities temporarily suspended by human presence. Among these natural communications came distinctive wolf vocalization from distant ridgeline, not random howling, but specific communication pattern recognizable to Willow's specialized understanding. Without hesitation, she responded with practiced vocalization, combining human anatomical capabilities with wolf communication knowledge, greeting exchange, acknowledging territorial boundaries with appropriate respect, signaling. The forest fell briefly silent following this interaction before resuming normal nocturnal sounds. Exchange completed according to wilderness protocol, incomprehensible to conventional human perception. White Blaze's daughter, Willow explained, without prompting, referencing original alpha female who had initiated her extraordinary adoption years earlier. Leading pack now, recognizes me despite changes. This continuing connection with the wolf community demonstrated remarkable integration rather than replacement of formative experiences, not abandonment of wilderness identity through human development, but incorporation of both perspectives into unique consciousness transcending conventional categories. Their return journey to the cabin proceeded through territories increasingly shaped by human activity. Logging operations extending boundaries, settlement expansions claiming additional wilderness, transportation routes connecting previously isolated locations. These civilizing influences represented an inevitable progression that would eventually transform even remote regions like their original meeting location. This transformation highlighted the importance of Willow's unique perspective as a potential bridge between traditionally separated worlds. Her extraordinary journey from wagon attack survival through wolf adoption to human reintegration created unprecedented understanding, spanning human civilization and wilderness existence. Perspective, offering potential wisdom regarding sustainable coexistence, increasingly relevant to territorial development. Considering writing about experiences Willow mentioned during the final evening of their expedition, not a personal story, but observations about wolf social structures and communication patterns, information useful for reducing conflicts between settlements and predator populations. This aspiration represented a perfect synthesis of her extraordinary background, utilizing unique knowledge gained through wolf existence to benefit both human communities and wilderness preservation. Through improved understanding, rather than an exploitative account focused on sensational wolf-child narrative, her proposed work would provide practical knowledge impossible through conventional research methodologies. Valuable contribution, Miller acknowledged, recognizing appropriate application of unique perspective. Experience creates understanding impossible through observation alone. As autumn progressed toward winter in the Montana Territory, their extraordinary partnership continued evolving through mutual respect and shared purpose, transcending conventional categorization. The solitary hunter who discovered a wolf-raised child had found an unexpected purpose beyond wilderness survival. The orphaned wagon attack survivor had developed unprecedented identity, integrating experiences spanning human civilization and wilderness existence. Their continuing journey represented living testament to human adaptability, wilderness wisdom, and extraordinary possibilities emerging from circumstances that initially appeared tragic beyond redemption. From wagon attack tragedy through wolf adoption to remarkable reintegration, Willow's extraordinary path demonstrated resilience, transcending conventional understanding. Legacy, extending beyond personal survival to unique perspective bridging worlds, typically separated by boundaries considered impermeable. The remarkable wolf girl and the lone hunter who discovered her had created something beyond simple rehabilitation. or fascinating survival story, living demonstration of integration possibilities between civilization and wilderness at a historical moment when such a perspective offered crucial wisdom for sustainable coexistence in rapidly changing frontier territories. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.